Hello, and welcome to this new session on Kubernetes on GCP using the kube admin tool. So in the previous sessions, what we've started to look at is using and trying to learn more about the Kubernetes framework. And what we've done in the last session is we've stood up a Kubernetes cluster onto a Raspberry Pi. Now today what we're going to attempt to do is we're going to stand up the same cluster onto GCP Cloud. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to bring you over to our YouTube channel here, and you can see at the top of this YouTube channel here, you'll basically see that there's a GitHub repository. Now in this GitHub repository there's a session 6 for these notes here. So if we click into session 6, you can see all of the notes that we're going to run through today. So this is actually marked as an intermediate level tutorial, but I mean it really is beginner to intermediate, and what I'd encourage you to always make sure is that you try to learn as much about these commands as you actually can away from these sessions, because we would not have a time on these sessions to explain every single command, but I'll do my best to make sure that I will be following all of these commands in order and make sure that everything works so that you have a running build, so you can also create and follow through on the same exact steps. Now, just to make some space, what I'd like to do here is I'm going to move this file over. It'll just give me more space here onto my main screen here for the actual recording. So right now I've gone into my GCP and I've activated this project. I've said I want this project to be the active project. Now I've put those steps into this section 1 here, so if you do need to be able to do that, you can see how to actually do that as well. But I've actually already done that and I've authenticated into the project itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a region here. So I'm going to be going on to section 2, but I'm going to be following through all of these actual steps here. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to create a region here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically set up a zone for use inside of that region. Okay. So the next thing I want to do here is I want to create my GCP Virtual Private Cloud, which is just a way to segment off a piece of the actual networking for my own project here. And you can see that this already exists because I had just run through some of the commands previously, and I'm sure that it would obviously work for you, but I'm sure that this subnet will probably already exist, which it already does. I wanted to kind of save some time on the video recording because it does actually take some time to work through. You do actually have to enable, especially when you enable the region here, you do have to enable some APIs, and setting up the actual networking, even though it's extremely fast in GCP, I just didn't want to be waiting for too long here. And I'm sure we can create the firewalls, and it sort of says to me it already exists, but for you it would just take a few moments, but you will basically see that it would say successfully created. So the last thing I'm going to do here is make sure that my external also works. So that's all good. It's taking care of the actual networking side of my GCP account, and again, these will all work for you. I just had run through them previously to make sure that I didn't waste too much time on the video. So the next thing I want to actually do here is I want to create my controller instance. So I've kind of gone down to this step now where to create my controller instance here. And my controller in my Kubernetes cluster, it'll work as my my master node or my control plane. So basically this will be the VM that I'll stood up with the Ubuntu Linux system installed, that will have the actual Kubernetes cluster installed onto it. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to create my controller here, and you can see that you can check for the operation to see when it's actually available. But really, because I'm in Compute Engine VM instances here, all I'd really have to do is actually refresh this, and in 1 second you basically sort of see that I now have a controller VM here. It's in the zone that I had created. It's in the networking subnet that I wanted, and it has an external IP. Everything is looking good so far. Now, if I really wanted to, and I would do this, I would suggest that you actually do this for exam type scenario, that you basically stand up, multiple VMs here, especially, some worker VMs. In the Kubernetes world, you'll basically always have a control plane and you'll have some worker VMs. So the control plane will distribute out the work to the worker VMs. I won't be doing that today, just in the interest of time. But what I'd like to actually do here is just I want to disable swap now. So this is just a good practice with the Ubuntu system. Okay. And I've put some metrics on the notes down here of how to actually install some networking tools. And I'm not going to worry too much about that right now. But I'm going to come down here to the section 3 here. So in my section 3, what I'd like to do is I'm going to now install my Kubernetes cluster on GCP using kubeadmin into my VM. So the first thing I need to do is I need to go up here, and there's a button here called SSH. And I'll click into that button called SSH because this is a Linux box. So I want to make sure that I get into my controller VM here. Now I'm already authenticated into my browser, but what's happening is my browser is actually sending the keys over to the VM to sort of say, yes, I know who this person is. I'm going to authenticate this person. And I've just enlarged the screen here. So you can see here that this is an actual Ubuntu system. So the first thing I want to do here is actually I want to run a few upgrade commands here. So I'm going to update and I'm going to upgrade my system here. And I'm going to wait for that to finish. And I'm going to upgrade, and I'm just going to upgrade the actual distribution here. And all of this will happen quite quickly. GCP is very, very fast. But the next thing I want to do here is, again, I want to kind of follow through, make sure I'm following through the actual notes here. And I want to add the Kubernetes repositories to the actual node here. So this is basically just saying, go out and find me the information about the actual installation here that we're going to do in a few moments regarding the Kubernetes. So I'm going to just run that. So that basically has everything now installed, and I'm just going to rerun an update here just to make sure that everything is just coming down and everything is the latest. So I'm now presented with a choice, because now I've actually come to the scenario where I need to actually install my Kubernetes cluster using the kubeadmin tool. Now I can see here in my notes I basically can run this command here and install the latest version here, or I can actually choose a version here like version 23, version 24, and I can install that specific version. Now for today I'm only going to install this. I'm going to say to the Kubernetes, install everything that's the latest of the latest for me, please. Now the latest version of Kubernetes, especially for the kubelet and the other components, is 1.26. So that's what's basically going to install. But I would certainly look at this if I was studying for an exam, or you wanted to try a certain scenario in work where you needed a specific version of Kubernetes. I would certainly try that. But for today, I'm just going to run through this Kubernetes. I'm just going to clear this exam just to clear this screen here. And you can sort of see, so this is the app update of the kubeadmin. And we're going to wait for that to finish. I'm going to mark this as hold. And what's happened here is it's gone through and it's installed a number of packages here for Kubernetes. So you can sort of see it's installed cry tools, it's installed socat, kubelet, kubectl, kubeadmin. All of these kind of packages have just come in onto our system. So we're ready to actually start onto our container D. And our container D installation, if we look back at the actual installation here, you can see that container D basically says it is, if down here you can see container D, it manages the complete container lifecycle of a system, of a host system, from image transfer and storage to container execution and supervision to low-level storage to network attachments and beyond. Really, you know, in the industry today, people have started to move away from Docker in the last number of years because Containerd has become recognized as the de facto standard for the Kubernetes cluster. Really, if you can learn the Containerd version, it may be a better long-term strategy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start to install my Containerd here. So I'm just going to clear my screen, clear my terminal here again, and I'm going to put those notes in, and I'm going to, again, I'm just following the actual steps here, so I'm just making sure that I run every single step here. And this says, do you want to install? And I do. Okay, so I've just getting ready the actual Containerd installation and for whatever is required for that Containerd installation to be working. I want to then run my command for my update. And then finally we get to install our Containerd as required. So we give that 1 minute, and if I now follow the notes here, you can see that that looks okay. So you could definitely take some time to look through these notes here. So I'm going to verify that my Containerd process or daemon is running, and I can see it's active and running. So it is up and running, so that looks good. I'm now going to take my next command here, and I'm going to sort of say go into the kubeadmin config file for the kubelet service. And what I need to do here is I just need to add a line here. So I'm just going to add a line here. I'm going to exit out of that. Now I use a VI. Now how to use VI or Nano, you know, as a solution architect, you would certainly need to start to learn about VI. But it's basically just they're basically just text editors on the Linux system. So now I'm going to just make sure that my CryCTL has the container d.sock for the networking side. Okay, so really what we've done now is we've got everything ready and correct up to the master node stage. So the next point is, this is where we're actually going to install the Kubernetes itself. So we've really been kind of, you know, in preparation up to this point to make sure that everything is installed and ready, so that when we do actually install the Kubernetes, we will not have any issues. So I'm going to run the nodes here called master node only. Now, again, if you had multiple nodes that you basically want to create here, you know, you'd have to basically run these commands here to make sure that you could actually join the node, the worker node, over to the cluster. But for today, I'm just going to say, you know, I'm going to have one master node here, and again I'm just going to move that over just to make some screen space. And what this is going to do is, this is basically going to sort of say, for using the kubeadmin config command, you know, pull the images down of the latest of everything from, you know, API server, controller manager, scheduler, proxy, ECT, core DNS. For the certified Kubernetes exams, you will have to understand how all of these components actually fit together and work inside of the Kubernetes cluster. But for today, it's really just to show you how I could actually install the Kubernetes cluster onto the GCP cloud. So at this point here, I'm going to sort of say kubeadmin init. So what I've done here is I've taken this command here and I sort of said, yeah, kubeadmin init. So onto my subnet that I created, and using the containerd for my distribution package. So everything here, you know, when this actually finishes, you will basically have your actual Kubernetes installed. Now, as you can see, it's initialized successfully. So right now, it says your Kubernetes control plane, which is this VM, so this is my VM, has initialized successfully. So everything here looks like it's actually worked. Again, you know, you can look down through these notes. These are really, really important, the notes. Anything that you install onto any system, you should always be reading the output of what was provided by the tool. But you can see here, you know, you can join any number of worker nodes by running the following. So if I was to take this command, if I had worker nodes, I could get this worker node or multiple worker nodes, and I could make them as part of the cluster with the control plane. So right now, it's worked. What I want to do now is just make sure that, you know, I'm reading these output here, but I do have them in the actual notes as well. And I want to just make sure that I get all of these commands in. So it does look like you know, we've successfully installed Kubernetes using the kubeadmin tool correctly, which is positive. Now, if I do a kubectl get pods, and kubectl is the terminal command for Kubernetes, but if I do a kubectl get pods dash all namespaces, I can see that, you know, I have all of my Kubernetes components that are required. Now, you can see that core DNS have not come up yet, and they will come up in a matter of moments. So I'm not too concerned right now about actual core DNS right now, because it will come up eventually. But you can see here, if I do kubectl get nodes, you can see that my controller, which is my VM, so that's where we've installed a Kubernetes cluster, has a status of not ready, and it has a role of control plane. Now, the reason it's actually not ready is because we actually haven't set up any of our networking between all of these nodes. Now, in this simple example, you know, I just have one controller node, but really all of these components here, and if you had multiple nodes here, they would all require networking between themselves to make sure that everything is running correctly and communicating correctly in the Kubernetes cluster. So what I want to do now is I want to go down to section 4 here. So I've run through section 3 here, which was the actual installation using kubeadmin. I'm running down now to section 4, and I'm basically sort of saying that I need to have some networking provider that will provide me the networking section of the Kubernetes cluster. So in this case, I'm going to use Calico, and if you look at projectcalico.org, you'll find out a huge amount of information about Calico and what it actually does. Another alternative is Fano, but today I'm going to use Calico because it does appear to be one of the most popular ones that people tend to move to. So I'm going to sort of say, I've just taken down my YAML file for Calico, and I'm basically going to apply this. So what happens here is kubectl apply calico.yaml, so that's the file that I just downloaded, and you can see that, you know, it's created a number of resource components here. So that looks good, that looks positive. Now, if I'm basically going to go back to my get pods command, it is good to be rechecking your work and making sure that, you know, every pod that you've just stood up is actually coming up and running. So what's happening here is the Calico has a container creating, and all of these components are going to start working all together. So when this is actually finished in a few moments, you'll sort of see that all of these will actually be in a running state. So we need them all in a running state, these actual pods, and the pod is the smallest unit of operation inside of the Kubernetes cluster. But Kubernetes itself actually installs pods into this namespace. So the namespace is a segmentation of where Kubernetes is going to provide functionality. And in this case, it uses the kube system namespace for its own internal operations. So I'm just, going to give that 1 or 2 minutes. Let's sort of see if this works and comes up. Yes. So I can actually see that in my kube namespace now, I can see that I actually have my Calico, I have my core DNS, and I have all of the actual components here, and they're all in a running state. So that's extremely positive here. Now, if I go back to my kubectl get nodes, because remember we have one node in this cluster right now, and you probably would have multiple nodes in an ideal situation. But for today, we have one node, and you can see, yes, now my controller is actually at a ready state. So my control plane is actually at a ready state. So that's really, really positive. Now, the one thing I want to sort of show you here is that we've just actually stood up this controller. And this controller, technically, if you think about if you were to do upgrades or maintenance on any of these controllers or worker nodes that you would have stood up, what it will happen is you will normally actually taint the VM or the node for not use. So you're basically going to sort of say, I'm not going to allow anybody to use it while I upgrade that part of the system, okay, which makes sense, okay. So you can see here what happens is when you actually stood up this controller, the Kubernetes itself assigned a no schedule taint. So it marked this controller node and said, don't allow anybody to actually schedule any deployments or any services or any functionality onto this controller node. So what I'm going to do is to be able to use that controller node, I'm now basically saying that, well, this controller node is actually ready. It's in a ready status. It's got all of its services running, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to remove that. I'm going to remove that taint right now, and I'm going to say it's now untainted. So that is actually untainted now. Okay, so that's good. So that will basically allow us to be able to use the actual controller node. Now, on section 5 here, so we've completed section 4 here, and when you go down to move down to section 5 here, you can see that this section 5 is related to load balancing. And in the actual load balancing itself here, we use MetalLB as one of the most popular load balancing solutions for Kubernetes clusters. Now, GCP has its own load balancing, but this is actually the internal load balancing to the actual cluster itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just clear this command here, and I'm going to apply that LB namespace, and I'm going to apply this command for our load balancing here of LB, and you can see that it's created most of the actual components. It hasn't created 1 or 2 of the components, but for this demo we wouldn't be too concerned about the actual load balancing, because it will actually work of what we've just done. So I'm going to move down and I'm going to create a secret. And finally, for my load balancing to work, what I'd like to do here, again I'm using VI. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to copy in my required components here, my YAML file, and I'm just going to save that. So I've just created a config file here, and I've just copied that YAML file into that actual YAML file. So the last thing I need to do here, just for my load balancing, is actually create the config map for the load balancing. So the final thing I really need to do here is, we've sort of seen that if I just move to the top of this, we've created our GCP project. We've gone down and we've created our networking components that are required for the GCP project. We've created a VM. We've installed Kubernetes here. We've installed Containerd, and we've installed our networking side, which is Calico, which is what was required, and I've also installed some load balancing. So really the actual final part of this demonstration here is actually to make sure that our deployment works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clear the screen again, and I'm going to create a new YAML file here again called Nginx deployment. I'm going to create a deployment using Nginx, and all you would essentially need to do here is just copy your commands from this file and make sure that you copy it exactly. So you can see here that I've just copied, the actual YAML from this documentation here over into my YAML file. So again, I'm going to save that. So I have my YAML file, and now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to apply that Nginx deployment, and I'm going to allow it to be created. So we do have a deployment that's created, we do have a service that's been created. Now what I want to do is make sure that all of my pods come up as part of this deployment. So I'm just going to give that a second, and you can see that when I do get pods that show that wide, you can see I've actually got 4 pods that are running in my Nginx deployment. Now we're going to get into what deployments are, what the services are, but just for today you would basically need to see that these all 4 are running, and they all have an individual cluster IP that's basically running on the controller node here. So that all looks good. So I'm going to get my Nginx service IP. So the IP in this case is 200 because in the service we specified that we wanted load balancer to run on 200. So if everything is okay here, I should be able to curl 200 here. So I can. So basically I can see that my, welcome to Nginx. So my deployment is basically running. So this deployment that I actually have here with the four pods here is basically coming back as curl. So the curl is actually working, the response is working. I'm getting my response from my Nginx. Now, if I'm to actually go in and actually delete this deployment now, so my deployment is deleted again, and I was to rerun my curl, you would see that basically there would be a timeout. So you could leave this running, but it will never return because the deployment and the service has actually been deleted. So there is no pods anymore. Even though your node will exist, there's nothing running on that actual controller plane anymore. Okay, so that looks to be everything that I need to do. So we've verified and validated that the actual deployments are working inside of our new GCP Kubernetes cluster that we stood up using the kubeadmin tool. I hope you enjoyed this session. The next session is going to include about certified administrator exam. So if you didn't understand, what we did here very, very quickly, we will get into the next. We will, as part of the next sessions, be looking at the Kubernetes certified administrator exam. So you will learn all about what these components are and how they fit together. Thank you for your time today. Thank you. Bye-bye.